It's time to talk about Lovecraft Anthologies. The fiction of HP Lovecraft confronts every reader with a conundrum. On the one hand, Lovecraft wasn't the most prolific of writers, he didn't live a long life, and except for a burst of creativity in his 30s, he would only really write a handful of short stories a year, if at all. Even including his many collaborations with other writers or the short stories he more or less ghost wrote for other people, all of his fiction can be collected in a volume of roughly this size or slightly larger. On the other hand, I would not recommend readers buy one of these beastly collected volumes. Completionism is a completely commendable thing. I do believe that if you're really passionate about the writers, even more than you must read everything they've written, you probably want to experience everything they've produced, especially if everything they've written is not that much after all. And I do believe that if you're a serious Lovecraft fan, it pays off and it makes sense to study the evolution of his writing and see, experience the many sides of his writing career, his lesser-known comic stories. Everything is written, it makes sense to read the full thing. But if you're a newcomer, or if you're interested in Lovecraft, you're a Lovecraft fan, but maybe not a hardcore fan, it doesn't really make sense to get the collected volumes. Because number one, who reads books like this? This is it's a brick, it's a coffin, why would you read this thing? Even just reading it on the couch is kind of uncomfortable, let alone on the bus or the train. But also, even more than for silly reasons of logistics, I think it doesn't make sense to read the full collected fiction if you're not a hardcore fan, because and I think my fan cred with Lovecraft is not in doubt after all the videos I've posted on my channel, after how much I've talked about him through the years, because I think Lovecraft did write quite a few pretty shitty short stories in his life. Jonathan Lethem, in his collection of essays, The Disappointment Artist, which I would recommend to any reader, even if you're not interested in Lethem or in the fiction and music and movies he talks about in the essays collected here. In this book, he has an essay called I Love Dick, where he talks about his relationship with Philip Dick. Jonathan Lethem famously is an immense Philip Dick fan. He edited the Library of America collected volumes of Philip Dick's fiction, which I imagine must have been pretty awesome for him. But in the essay he also says that loving Philip Dick as a writer is strange in many ways. The way he puts it, by quoting Bob Dylan, he is saying that it's like being in love with the ugliest girl in the world. Philip Dick, according to Lethem, and I have to take his word because I've only read a handful of his novels and short stories, has written quite a lot of bad novels. His writing style is kind of perplexing and it works for what he wants to express, except when it doesn't and it's just plain ugly. And some sides of his vision, of his ideas and philosophy about the world, of his poetics, are, to say the least, perplexing and puzzling. And I personally believe that Philip Dick and H.P. Lovecraft share many, many similarities as literary figures. Their fiction has nothing to do with one another, they have absolutely nothing to share. The Lovecraft's concerns and Philip Dick's concerns are very, very different, I would say. I think the points of contact are minimal, if any, but they are both figures from popular culture, from genre fiction, that have recently risen to the ranks of the canon, even to the Library of America. Oh, that's impressive. They are writers who did write quite a few bad pieces of fiction in their career. They are writers whose style is very peculiar and who people have so much fun criticizing for their style of writing, very often missing the point and embarrassing themselves, although it is true. Philip Dick, from what I've experienced, and definitely Lovecraft, occasionally writes ugly sentences. And both of them harbored ideas that are strange/shameful and sometimes express those ideas in their fiction. With Philip Dick, from what I understand, and to be fair, I'm not talking about racism or bigotry, it's more a matter that he had some wacky views on reality and religion. With H.P. Lovecraft, of course, is the extreme conservatism of his youth and the racism he harbored all his life, the one topic, the one idea where he always refused to accept confrontation with other people, other intellectuals, and to open up his mind to other points of view. Those things do transpire in some of his stories. And I 100% share Lethem's frustration when I think about my own experience as a fan of HP Lovecraft. I love HP Lovecraft's fiction. I adore it so much. He is, give or take, he is my favorite writer. Ever since I was 15, I was shocked with Dagon's narrator to experience the dreams of a day when they may rise above the billows, to drag down in their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind. Listen to the music of it. Experience, I was like, oh yeah, I do dream about that stuff. I experienced and I thought anew at the ways I see the world, and I realize our place in a cruel reality and the importance of fiction and imagination into our lives. I experience these things anew, and I keep re-experiencing them with every rereading through Lovecraft's fiction. I lose my silver key every couple of months, inevitably, like that guy Randolph Carter, all the time. But, my god, Lovecraft does find it incredibly hard not to botch a story. The closest he gets to perfection, I would say, is possibly The Call of Cthulhu or The Quest of Iranon. The Quest of Iranon is a short story that flirts with perfection, is almost there. It's such beautiful prose, it's perfect up to the very last, and then Lovecraft has to add that fucking final sentence that just goes one bit over the top and ruins the whole thing and makes it stupidly sentimental where it really didn't need to be. I could go on and on, but I would just bore you, probably offend a few other Lovecraft fans who don't really trust how much I love Lovecraft. I could talk about The Whisperer in Darkness, which captures the feeling of horror, of dread, of mysterious forces better than any other piece of writing I've ever encountered, but also features an academician who is the most stupid narrator in the history of literature, and aliens that are so transparent in their plans and so goofy they look like they came out of a Scooby-Doo episode. But these stories I'm criticizing are the masterpieces, are the great Lovecraft stories. A few of his stories really do not deserve to be collected in anything but a complete works dedicated to hardcore, to big fans. Because some of Lovecraft's stories are really superfluous, but others are stories, are works of fiction that, in my opinion, every reader should experience at one point in their lives. Because of this discrepancy, a good anthology is needed. Unfortunately, the situation these days is not really ideal. Let's start with an overview of some very popular, very common Lovecraft anthologies, and of course there are countless out there, especially now that it is in the public domain. Let's consider a few of the most famous ones. If you're new to Lovecraft, if you're looking for an introduction into his works and you want to experience his writing, your best bet remains by far The Call of Cthulhu and Other Stories, published by Penguin Classics and edited by ST Joshi. What Joshi did is collect in Call of Cthulhu most of Lovecraft's most famous short stories, and Joshi is the most prominent Lovecraftian scholar writing these days. His notes are enlightening and provide some context on the writing of the story and some information about some of the least clear references inside the stories, and give you a sense of the web of references of the literacy that Lovecraft showed in his writing. Still, Call of Cthulhu is not perfect as an anthology, if you ask me. I think the second short story in it, after the obvious Dagon is the only way you can begin a Lovecraft anthology, let's be clear. Everyone should read Lovecraft starting with Dagon, if you ask me. I think the second story in there is The Statement of Randolph Carter, and I personally believe that it's a very stupid story about a guy speaking on the phone with his friend who's exploring a tomb, whatever. It's clearly it is admittedly a rewriting of a dream, and dreams tend to be stupid, and Statement of Randolph Carter is kind of silly. The Festival, I think, is there, which again shows potential but goes kind of nowhere. It's not perfect, let's say. I think what Penguin and Joshi were doing pretty clearly was trying to split Lovecraft's best stories between Call of Cthulhu and others, and The Thing on the Doorstep and others, and then they also published Dreams in the Witch House, which collects mostly Lovecraft's more fantastical fantasy dream stories, which, you know, Penguin is a publisher, they have to spring books on people. I get it, I understand it. It does create kind of a beautiful progression from Lovecraft's most essential writing in Cthulhu to some more in Thing on the Doorstep to Dreams in the Witch House, if you really want to have a complete set, even though some of his short stories are left out of all of the 3 volumes, for a good reason, I think. I do think that this kind of penalizes Lovecraft's dream stories, which are among his best writing, if you ask me, and are essential to understanding his broader poetics. But still, what can you do? The world is it's a broken place. Oxford University Press, as is kind of their brand, goes bland, predictable, safe, respectable, with a collection of his classic horror tales. I find it hilarious that even on the cover they kind of went for the tentacles that every cheap publisher slaps on the cover of a Lovecraft Anthologies, but they use some kind of 19th century picture from some naturalist book rather than just go with a tacky octopus or something. And again, that's a safe collection. It might not be the worst anthology out there, but why, oh my god, why would you open an anthology with the horror at red hook, which is third tier material if you ask me? It's very problematic as a short story. Why would you have that short story be some person's first contact with HP Lovecraft? Also, it's a collection of his best short stories, horror short stories, the classic stories, but where's Pigman? Where's Dagon, for the love of God? Why is The Shadow Out of Time in here? And where's The Color, most notably? It's a Lovecraft anthology. I get it that it's just the horror tales, but I dislike that anthology. And if you are wondering, Book Chemist, you are complaining and you're a bit whiny at the moment, but will you be whinier later into the video? Yes, I will! Speaking of Gollanc's Necronomicon, that book rubs me the wrong way. You've probably seen it, it's all over the place, it's pretty popular, I understand, as an anthology. It rubs me the wrong way for 2 big reasons. The first one, as I mentioned before, it makes little sense for me to read a book that is kind of this size if it's going to be your first introduction to Lovecraft. If it's not, and you're looking for a complete set, a collected works with all of his fiction, that one doesn't have everything. For whatever reason, they left out some arbitrary things, including some of his best short stories. Stuff like Polaris, that's top second tier, if you ask me, when it comes to Lovecraft stories. And the other thing that rubs me the wrong way is very silly, but the Necronomicon has some beautiful illustrations into it, of night gaunts, of dusty books, of, I think, skeletons and dead people and rats and stuff like that, and other generic gothic stuff, which is fine, but why oh why would you just drop them at random across the book? The illustrations have nothing to do with the stories they appear close to. They provide, sometimes they are ridiculously out of place next to the chapter or the paragraphs where they appear. Why would you do it so haphazardly? Do a nice job. The one thing I really like about the Gollancz edition, about the Necronomicon, is that they put the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath last. And if after reading 700 pages of Lovecraft you're like, I still want more, I still want the longest piece of fiction Lovecraft ever wrote, then you are one of those very rare people, the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath's ideal target audience. Do I like the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath? Only moderately. I only built a fucking altar to it. Library of America edition of HP Lovecraft, edited by Peter Straub. What made fans all over the world, I hope, cry with joy knowing that their author finally got the recognition he deserved. This book breaks my heart, I have to confess it. Number one, because I wanted to edit the damn thing, not Peter Straub. Shut up, I have unrealistic dreams, I know. And number two, because it's such a missed opportunity. It opens with the statement of Randolph Carter. That's almost as bad as opening with Red Hook, which is of course included in here, together with Herbert West Reanimator, which is everywhere. I think it's also in the Penguin's Call of Cthulhu anthology I recommended. Why is it there? Lovecraft himself kind of didn't even like writing it, and it's so silly and over the top and superfluous. It's another one of those tier 3 stories. You read it because you've run out of other Lovecraft stories to read. Sure, it's kind of fun because it's so over the top, and Joshi recommends that the story should be read as a satire on horror rather than as straight up meant to scare you horror fiction, and when you read it that way it's kind of fun, but it's definitely not anthology material, definitely not Library of America material. The new annotated HP Lovecraft, published by Norton, edited by Leslie Klinger, and I think the first volume has an introduction by Alan Moore, is kind of a treasure chest for fans. It does include Herbert West Reanimator again, but I feel like that's, sure, it's an anthology, but it's also another huge box of a book, and for obvious reasons. It's heavily annotated, it includes a lot of paraphernalia related to every story. It's more something you give to fans who already own 7 or 8 editions of Lovecraft, rather than something you give to a new reader to get an introduction into the world of Lovecraft. I will be talking about the new annotated HP Lovecraft, both the first volume and the recently released second volume, very soon on the channel. Just, this is neither here or there, because this is not an anthology, it's a collected works, but Barnes & Noble's collected works, at the end of the day, might kind of be your go-to choice. But sadly enough, it's complete fiction, but it doesn't include the collaboration / ghostwriting, and some of those, in particular The Curse of Yig, are essential. Curse of Yig to me is a tier 1 story. It's one of the must-read stories by Lovecraft. It's so effectively scary and traumatizing and interesting in the way it depicts the character's psychological deterioration in the span of a single night. It's a good story. Also, this big beast is riddled with typos. That sucks. At least ST Joshi contributed the introduction and the brief notes before every story. So, I guess we can conclude that there is really no final definitive anthology of HP Lovecraft out there that I can recommend as the go-to book to consult where you want some Lovecraft. I guess I must draw a list myself. Tune in next week for my table of content to my completely fictional, completely imaginary, perfect anthology of HP Lovecraft's works. What would you put in your ideal anthology, in a book that you could both recommend new readers who want to discover the world of Lovecraft, and at the same time a book that you could carry with you if you're traveling on the weekend, you want to reread some Lovecraft, but you don't really want to bring with you the 10-kilo, typo-riddled Barnes & Noble's complete fiction. Let me know in the comment section below. Let me know what your favorite existing anthology is. If you disagree with some of the points I raised in the video, I look forward to discussing some Lovecraft, and thank you for watching. Bye guys.